With their loss at Midway, the Japanese ability to project power is truncated. They only have two of their six major fleet carriers left, and that means that there are only two air groups of first class pilots left to carry the war on. Now, the Japanese admiral, Isoroku Yamamoto, who was the one who has commanded the Japanese fleet since before Pearl Harbor, who had spent time in the United States, said, "Beware the United States, it's a sleeping giant. We will have, if we go to war with the United States, we'd better win it within the first 6 months. Because after that, the difference in industrial production between the United States, who at that time had factories and we produced all of what we needed and much of what the world needed, until we shipped all those factories to China. Great idea, U.S. Was so much greater than Japan's industrial output that in a long war of attrition, Japan was bound to lose. Yamamoto knows this. So with the loss of those carriers at Midway, it's about 6 months into the war, June 3rd, 4th, 1942, Yamamoto's goal changes. And what he wants to do is gather all of the Solomon Islands under his sway. Because using these islands as air bases, he can continue moving southeastward to New Caledonia and beyond and cut Australia off. If Japan dominates the air and sea to the north and east of Australia, America will not be able to send the Aussies troops, supplies, or anything else. It'll be a defensive barrier. So the Japanese have a major base at Rabaul in the Bismarck Archipelago, and they start moving south, and they begin building an air base on the southernmost island, the big island of Guadalcanal, in the Solomons. Now, this information is told to Americans by Australian coast watchers. The Solomons had been part of Australia since certainly the end of World War I, and there were Australian plantations here, and these guys did not want the Japanese to stay. So the Americans, in August of 1942, the same time that General von Paulus heads into Stalingrad, the Americans decide that we are going to launch our first real offensive in the Pacific Ocean to date. America had done a symbolic attack before this. After a series of American defeats, we launched land-based bombers from aircraft carriers, which is really hard to do. Under the command of General Jimmy Doolittle, these land-based bombers do a symbolic bombing of Tokyo and then fly on to Chinese nationalist forces along the Asian coast, and some of the pilots get smuggled back to the world from Japanese-occupied China. They usually end up going through British India and then back. But that was a symbolic attack. Not much damage was done. The Japanese were infuriated because if a bomb had fallen on the emperor, the entire point of their nation would have been lost. Because the point of Japan is to protect the god emperor. That is the core value of state Shinto. What we're going to do is we're going to land Marine Division, the 1st Marine Division, onto Guadalcanal, and we're going to take the Japanese air base and make it an American air base, and we are going to contend with the Japanese for the Solomons. The Japanese are at the end of a massively long supply train. The United States is at the end of a massively long supply chain. So in August of 42, a small force of Marines and aircraft carriers approached the island of Guadalcanal, and they land forces on Tulagi and Guadalcanal. The Japanese, when they see the American landing forces, hide, they bolt, they run for the hills, leaving the airfield to the Marines. The Marines are going to rename the newly built Japanese airfield Henderson Field after a flyer killed at Midway. And so we control a tiny pocket of Guadalcanal near the modern town of Honoria, which includes the airfield Henderson Field. In this jungle hell, The Japanese begin a slow reinforcement. By day and by night, they are sending in ships, and they also have, by night, barges that are towed from island to island and land. But the Japanese consistently underestimate the number of Marines on Guadalcanal. However, the Japanese very quickly gain naval superiority. Soon after the Americans are landed, but without all of their equipment, on a steamy night at the end of summer, the Japanese launch a cruiser attack, and it is the worst defeat in American naval history up to that point, the Battle of Savo Island. In that, the ocean north of Guadalcanal gets its nickname Iron Bottom Sound, as an entire force of American cruisers, joined by the Australian cruiser Canberra, are sunk by Japanese forces. So the Americans realize that the Japanese control the night. But with the airfield, once we start shipping in aircraft, we control the day. So every night the Japanese send in reinforcements. Every day, many days anyway, the Americans send in reinforcements, but we won't risk our carriers too close to Guadalcanal. The battle goes on from August through September through October. In the middle of to late of October, the Japanese are ready to launch an attack. And that attack is through the jungle south, up towards the flank of the American forces, where they don't think that there are a lot of American troops. In this attack, America is introduced to a new name, John Basilone. John Basilone is a Marine, a professional Marine. He had been a soldier before. Basilone personally mans a machine gun unit and gathers and brings ammo barefoot across a battlefield for hours in the heart of a Japanese bayonet attack. He himself kills dozens of Japanese, and he personally keeps Marines in other foxholes equipped with water necessary to keep the machine guns cool enough to keep working, with bullets. By running out into danger, Basilone wins the Congressional Medal of Honor, and he becomes a national hero. The Japanese do not break in October. After another month, in November of 42, they are ready for another full effort, massive attack. At sea, the Japanese are moving battleships into the Guadalcanal area. One of their battleships is sunk by aircraft from the Enterprise, a ship that's almost everywhere where battle is in the Pacific early in the war. And then, I think it's the night of 24-25 November, the U.S. battleship Washington, along with the South Dakota, are sent into Iron Bottom Sound to stop the Japanese battlecruiser Kirishima. There is a moment where the battleships spot American PT boats, little motorboats with torpedoes on them. And the admiral in command of the American battleships, Willis Augustus Lee, who has served along the Pacific China coast for a while, picks up the radio and in the clear transmits, "This here is Ching Chong China Lee. Call off your boys." He was a Southerner. And he was called Ching Lee because of his exploits on the China coast. And Lee is not only an American name, it's also a Chinese name. So it fit. Admiral Lee in the USS Washington sank the battlecruiser Kirishima and protected the American position from battleship shelling. Meanwhile, General Vandergrift on the ground and Admiral McCain in command of the air group keeps control of Guadalcanal in the face of attacks August, September, October, November, January. By February, the battle is finally over, just like Stalingrad. This is a 6-month bloodbath where the Japanese are sending everything they can south, and the Americans are sending everything we can southwest. And ultimately, the Japanese, in the middle of the night, evacuate their remaining forces from the island of death. And we take Guadalcanal, and it's going to be the beginning of an island-hopping campaign. Along with Midway, Guadalcanal is a turning point. In this grinding series of battles, the Japanese spend the last of their offensive power. For example, in the battle off Santa Cruz Island, the last two air groups on the Shokaku and the Zoikaku sink the USS Hornet and damage heavily the American aircraft carrier Enterprise. But in doing so, the air groups of the Japanese get slaughtered. After the Battle of Bloody Santa Cruz, it's called, the Japanese carriers no longer have first-class aircraft carrier pilots. They're dead. But the American system is just spooling out hundreds and thousands of more first-class American aircraft carrier pilots. And really, after this point, the Japanese are no longer able to fight. Finally, during this battle, there is a breakthrough in code breaking that says that Admiral Yamamoto, the Japanese Supreme Commander himself, is going to be engaged in a tour of the islands from Rabaul and southward into the Japanese-controlled Solomon Islands. Stupidly, the Japanese broadcast the actual itinerary that the Admiral is going to follow. The times and places he'll be certain places. We get a couple of P-38 Lightnings, twin-engined Army fighters, and we place them in the air waiting for Yamamoto's aircraft and its escorts to fly by. It's an assassination. Yamamoto's plane is shot down, he dies crashing in flames, and we have killed the strategic mastermind behind many of Japan's victories early in World War II. It's war. And if you have a chance to kill one of your enemy's key assets, you do that. So, with the turning point battles of the Atlantic in 42-43, the battles of El Alamein, especially Second El Alamein with the British breakthrough, the Battle of Stalingrad with the Russian victory, the battles of Midway and Guadalcanal, the American victories over Japan, the tide has turned. The last phase of World War II is from 1943 to 45. It could have been much longer in the Pacific, and we will talk about those next.